Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rated from 1 to 10. Now let's start. The North Sea churned with fury as Jorunn Dagsdottir stood on the jagged cliffs overlooking the tempestuous waters. Her golden hair whipped violently across her face, the salt spray stinging her eyes as she squinted at the distant shape being tossed helplessly among the waves. A ship had broken apart, its wooden remnants scattered like fallen leaves upon the water's surface. And there, a man, struggling against the merciless current. Without hesitation, Jorunn tore off her heavy woolen cloak and dove from the cliff edge. The icy waters closed around her body like a fist, but she was the daughter of Dag the seafarer, raised alongside the fjords of Vestfold. The sea had been her second mother, and she cut through its rage with practiced strokes. The man was barely conscious when she reached him, his strange armor weighing him down. A Saxon, she realized with a jolt of alarm as she hooked her arm beneath his shoulders. An enemy. For a heartbeat, she considered letting him slip beneath the waves, one less Saxon to raid their shores, but something in his face, peaceful despite his dire circumstances, stayed her darker thoughts. By the time she dragged him to the narrow, pebbly beach, her muscles burned with exhaustion. The man lay still, his dark hair plastered across a face too noble for a common soldier. A chieftain's son, perhaps. She pressed her ear to his chest, relieved to hear the faint drumbeat of his heart. "Live, Saxon," she murmured, beginning the work of removing his waterlogged armor. "I did not brave those waters to rescue a corpse." As if in response to her command, the man coughed violently, seawater spilling from his lips. His eyes fluttered open, eyes blue as summer skies, and focused on her face with confusion. "Am I dead?" he asked in halting Norse, his accent thick but understandable. Jorunn's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You speak our tongue?" "Enough to trade," he replied, then winced as he tried to sit up. "Or to beg for mercy, should the need arise." A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Which are you doing now? Trading or begging?" "Neither." He managed to prop himself on his elbows, looking at her with growing wonder. "You saved me." "Yes," she admitted, suddenly aware of how this would appear to her people. "Though perhaps I should not have." The Saxon studied her face, his gaze lingering on the silver Thor's hammer that hung at her throat. "My name is Quentin Wulfricsson," he said finally. "And I owe you my life." "Jorunn Dagsdottir," she replied, helping him to his feet. "And you owe me nothing but silence about who rescued you. My father is Dag Thorvaldsson, and he would not take kindly to his daughter saving a Saxon warrior." The storm had passed by nightfall, leaving a clear, star-filled sky. Jorunn had hidden Quentin in a hunter's hut half a league from her father's longhouse, bringing him dry clothes stolen from her brother's chest and food wrapped in linen cloth. "Your father," Quentin said as he warmed his hands by the small fire she had built. "He's a Jarl?" "No, but he commands 3 longships and sits close to Jarl Gunnar at feasts." She watched him eat, his movements careful despite his obvious hunger. "And you? Your clothes are finely made, your sword of good steel." "My father is thane to King Athelred. We were bound for Hedeby to discuss terms with Danish merchants when the storm struck." His expression darkened. "My men? I saw no others," Jorunn said quietly. "The sea has claimed them." Quentin closed his eyes, grief etching lines around his mouth. "They were good men. Loyal. As were the villagers your king's forces slaughtered at Lindisfarne," she countered, though without the heat she might have expected to feel. "That was not my doing," he replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "Just as the Viking raid that killed my mother and sister when I was 10 was not yours." The silence that followed held the weight of generations of bloodshed, a chasm between them deeper than the sea that had nearly claimed him. "Why did you save me?" he asked finally. "Knowing what I am?" Jorunn considered the question, turning it over like a strange stone found on the shore. "I don't know," she admitted. "Perhaps the Norns have woven some purpose for you in their tapestry that is not yet fulfilled. Or perhaps you simply couldn't let another soul perish when you had the power to prevent it." His voice was soft, appreciative. "That speaks to your character, not to destiny." She felt a warmth creep up her neck that had nothing to do with the fire. You should rest. Tomorrow I'll help you find your way to the trading post at Kopang. From there, you can secure passage back to your homeland. Quentin reached out, his fingers briefly touching the back of her hand. Thank you, Jorunn Dagsdottir. I will not forget this kindness. Something in his touch sent a tremor through her that she chose to ignore. Sleep, Saxon. Dawn comes early in these northern lands. She left him there, making her way back to her father's hall beneath the watchful eyes of the stars, unaware that the threads of their lives had become irrevocably tangled. The next day passed in a blur of secretive visits to the hut, bringing Quentin food and news. She learned he was 25 winters, the second son of his father, educated by monks and trained in warfare by the finest Saxon sword masters. In turn, she told him of her life in Vestfold, of her 3 older brothers who followed their father on raids, of her mother who had taught her runes and healing before passing to Helheim 2 winters prior. You have no husband? He asked as the second evening approached. I have refused all offers, she replied, carefully avoiding his gaze as she tended the fire. My father indulges me because I am skilled with herbs and the women of the settlement seek my help with ailments. He says I am more valuable as a healer than as some man's wife. A wise father, Quentin observed. In Wessex you would have been married off years ago, regardless of your wishes. And you? No Saxon bride awaits your return? A shadow crossed his face. There was to be an arrangement with the daughter of another thane, but she died of fever before we could be betrothed. Since then I have been too occupied with my father's affairs to consider another match. Something like relief fluttered in Jorunn's chest, though she couldn't say why. Tomorrow I will take you to Kopang. Your wound is healing well, and you can walk without pain now. Yes, he agreed, though there was a reluctance in his voice that matched the heaviness in her heart. I should return to my father. He will think me dead. Jorunn nodded, rising to leave. I will come at first light. She was halfway to the door when his voice stopped her. Jorunn. She turned, finding him much closer than she expected, his tall frame illuminated by the firelight. I wish we had met in a different time, under different circumstances, he said softly. Before she could respond, a horn blasted in the distance, the warning signal from the village watchman. Her blood turned to ice. Raiders, she whispered. Quentin's face hardened. Saxons? Who else would dare? She grabbed her cloak. Stay here. If they find you, I'll come with you, he insisted, reaching for the sword she had returned to him. No! Her voice was sharp with fear. If my people see a Saxon warrior, they will kill you without question. Please, Quentin. Stay hidden. Their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills before he reluctantly nodded. Be careful. She fled into the night, racing toward the sounds of shouting and the orange glow of torches that now lit the horizon. By the time she reached the settlement, chaos had engulfed her world. Saxon warriors, dozens of them, poured from longboats, not the graceful vessels of her people, but sturdy enough to cross the sea. They carried swords and shields, torches setting fire to the outlying buildings. Her father's men had formed a defensive line, but they were outnumbered. Jorunn darted through the confusion, searching for her family. She found her youngest brother, Eirik, helping the women and children retreat to the forest. Where is father? She demanded, grabbing his arm. Fighting at the shore with Bjorn and Halfdan, Eirik replied, his young face streaked with soot. They came without warning, searching for someone. A lord's son who was lost at sea. They think we took him prisoner. Jorunn's heart stopped. Quentin. They had come for Quentin. The realization struck her with the force of Thor's hammer. These men were not raiders. They were a rescue party, mistakenly believing their lord's son had been captured. And now her people would die for her secret. She pushed past Eirik, ignoring his shouts as she raced toward the shoreline. The clash of steel on steel grew louder, men's cries piercing the night air. She spotted her father, his great axe rising and falling as he battled a Saxon warrior in gleaming mail. Stop! She screamed, but her voice was lost in the din of battle. A hand grabbed her shoulder, spinning her around. She found herself face to face with a Saxon commander, his helmet adorned with a crest marking his high rank. "Please," she begged in the trading tongue. "There is no need for this bloodshed. The man you seek is safe." The commander's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What do you know of Lord Quentin?" Before she could answer, a powerful voice cut through the chaos. "Hold!" The fighting stuttered to a halt as all eyes turned toward the source of the command. There, silhouetted against the burning buildings, stood Quentin Wulfricsson, still wearing the borrowed Norse clothing but with his Saxon sword gleaming in his hand. "Lower your weapons," he ordered his men in their native tongue before switching to Norse. "Dag Thorvaldsson, call off your warriors. This is a misunderstanding." Her father, bleeding from a cut above his eye, stared in disbelief at the Saxon lord. "What trickery is this?" Quentin stepped forward, sheathing his sword in a gesture of peace. "No trickery. I am Quentin Wulfricsson, Thane's son of Wessex. My ship was destroyed in the storm 2 days past. I was not captured, I was rescued." The Saxon commander approached Quentin, relief evident on his weathered face. "My lord, we feared you dead when the wreckage washed ashore. When we found pieces of Saxon armor on the beach, we thought the worst." "How did you find me?" Quentin asked. "We followed the coast, questioning fishermen. One spoke of a settlement where a chieftain's daughter was seen dragging a body from the sea. We assumed you were taken prisoner." Jorunn stepped forward, ignoring her father's warning glare. "I pulled him from the water," she admitted. "I hid him because I feared what my people would do to a Saxon warrior." Her father's face darkened with anger and betrayal. "Jorunn! You brought this upon us." "She saved my life," Quentin interjected firmly. "Had she not risked herself to rescue me, I would now lie at the bottom of the sea. A Saxon life is not worth Norse blood," spat Bjorn, her eldest brother, gesturing to the bodies that littered the ground. "Enough blood has been spilled this night," Quentin replied, his voice carrying the weight of command. "I propose we end this now, before more lives are lost." Dag Thorvaldsson studied the Saxon lord with narrowed eyes. "And why should I trust the word of a Saxon dog?" "Because I give you my oath, on my honor and my life, that we will depart at first light with no further violence." Quentin's gaze was steady, unwavering. "And I will personally ensure that compensation is paid for those who have fallen and the damage to your settlement." A tense silence followed, broken only by the crackling of flames and the moans of the wounded. Finally Dag grunted his assent. "You will camp on the beach, away from our homes. Any Saxon who approaches the village will be killed without question." "Agreed," Quentin said with a respectful nod. He turned to his commander. "Oswald, see to it that our men withdraw to the shore. Tend to the wounded, both ours and theirs." As the two groups separated, Jorunn felt the weight of accusing stares from her people. She had betrayed them by harboring an enemy, by keeping secrets that had led to death. Her father brushed past her without a word, his silence more damning than any rebuke. Only Quentin paused as he turned to follow his men. Their eyes met across the blood-soaked ground, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, regret, gratitude, and something deeper that neither dared name. "Until tomorrow," he said softly. She nodded, watching him walk away, wondering how everything had gone so terribly wrong. Dawn broke over a somber landscape. The dead had been prepared for burial, the wounded tended with poultices and prayers. Jorunn had worked through the night, her hands steady even as her heart trembled with the weight of her actions. Her father found her, as she was washing blood from her fingers in a wooden basin. 3 men dead," he said without preamble. 7 wounded. All because my daughter chose to save a Saxon rather than let the sea take what was rightfully hers to claim. Would you have had me watch a man drown when I had the power to save him?" she asked, not meeting his gaze. "If that man is our enemy?" "Yes." Dag's voice was hard as stone. "Our people have suffered raids from their kind for generations. Your own mother's brother was killed by Saxon spears. And they would say the same of us," Jorunn replied. When does it end, father? When every Saxon and every Norseman lies dead? Dad grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. It is not for you to decide when the blood feud ends. You have shamed me, Jorunn. Shamed our family and our ancestors. His words cut deeper than any blade. I am sorry for the pain I have caused, she whispered. But I cannot be sorry for saving a life. The Saxon lord has offered Wergild for our dead, Dad continued, releasing her. Silver, amber, and furs. A generous sum. Then you have accepted his peace? For now. Her father's eyes hardened. But know this, you are no longer welcome in my hall. When the Saxons leave, you go with them. Jorunn stared at him in disbelief. You would cast out your own daughter? I have no daughter who would betray her people for the sake of a Saxon. He turned away, his shoulders rigid with anger and grief. Gather what belongs to you. The Saxon ships sail with the tide. Exile. The word echoed in her mind like a death knell. To be cast out from her family, her people, her homeland, there could be no greater punishment for a Norse woman. Without the protection of her kin, she would be nothing, nowhere. When Quentin found her sitting alone on the rocky shore, her possessions bundled in a cloak beside her, her eyes were dry but hollow with despair. Your father told me, he said quietly, settling beside her. I am sorry, Jorunn. This was never my intention. Nor mine, she replied, watching the waves that had brought him into her life. But intentions matter little against outcomes. Come with me to Wessex, he said after a long pause. I owe you a life debt. I can provide you with a place in my father's household, protection, comfort. She turned to look at him, really look at him, this Saxon lord with his earnest blue eyes and honorable heart. As what? Your servant? Your concubine? A flush crept up his neck. As my guest. Until you decide what you wish to do. The Saxon ships were being loaded, warriors carrying supplies and weapons aboard under the watchful eyes of Norse defenders. Her people, no longer her people, stood in silent judgment as she walked toward the beach with Quentin at her side, her meager possessions clutched in her arms. Her youngest brother, Eirik, broke from the crowd, running to embrace her despite their father's shout of protest. Don't go, he pleaded, his young face streaked with tears. She held him tightly, memorizing the feel of him in her arms. I must, little wolf. But remember what Mother taught us, the stars are the same wherever we stand. When you look up at night, know that I am seeing the same sky. Eirik pressed something into her hand, their mother's bone comb, carved with protective runes. To keep you safe, he whispered before their father's men pulled him away. As the Saxon ships pushed off from shore, Jorunn stood at the rail, watching her homeland recede into the distance. She did not cry. Norse women did not waste tears on fate. They endured what the Norns wove for them with quiet strength. Quentin joined her, his presence solid and reassuring at her side. I swear to you, Jorunn Dagsdottir, that you will want for nothing in my father's lands. I want for everything already, she replied. My family, my home, my place in the world, all gone. Not gone, he said softly. Changed. As the sea changes the shape of the shore, slowly, but inevitably. She turned to face him, salt spray dampening her golden hair. And what of us, Quentin Wulfriksson? What change does the future hold for a Saxon lord and an exiled Norse woman? His hand found hers on the ship's rail, warm despite the cold wind. I don't know, he admitted. But I would discover it with you, if you are willing. The voyage to Wessex took 7 days, days filled with seasickness and suspicion as Jorunn found herself surrounded by men who had, until recently, been her sworn enemies. Only Quentin's constant presence kept the hostile stares at bay, his authority unquestioned among his men. At night, he would join her at the prow of the ship, teaching her Saxon words while she corrected his Norse pronunciation. They spoke of their childhoods, their beliefs, the vast differences between their worlds, and the surprising similarities they discovered beneath the surface. Your Odin sacrificed himself on the world tree for knowledge, Quentin observed one evening as they watched the stars emerge. Our Christ sacrificed himself on the cross for mankind's salvation. Perhaps our gods are not so different at their hearts. Except yours has but one face, while ours have many. Jorunn replied. Your priests would call that heathen blasphemy. My priests are not here, he said with a small smile. And I find I prefer learning about your gods from your lips than from the fearful sermons of monks who have never met a Norseman except in battle. When the English coast finally appeared on the horizon, Jorunn felt a flutter of apprehension. Your father, will he welcome an enemy into his home? Quentin's expression grew serious. My father is a practical man. You saved his son's life. That will count for much. But Jorunn, he hesitated. Our people have different customs, different expectations. There will be pressure for you to accept Christian baptism, to adopt our ways. I will not forsake my gods, she said firmly, her hand going to the Thor's hammer at her throat. I would never ask that of you, he assured her. But others might not be so understanding. You must be prepared. The Thane's estate sprawled across rolling green hills, a wooden hall at its center surrounded by smaller buildings and fields where peasants toiled. As their party approached, servants and warriors gathered to welcome their lord's son, thought lost at sea. Thane Wulfric was an imposing man with a silver-streaked beard and the same blue eyes as his son. He embraced Quentin fiercely before turning his assessing gaze on Jorunn. So this is the Norse woman who pulled you from the waves, he said in heavily accented Norse. She does not look strong enough for such a feat. Appearances can be deceiving, father, Quentin replied. Jorunn Dagsdottir is the daughter of a respected chieftain, skilled in healing and runes. And she has been exiled from her homeland for the crime of saving my life. The older man's eyebrows rose. Is that so? Then it seems we owe her a great debt. He inclined his head toward Jorunn. You are welcome in my hall, daughter of Dag. Though I warn you, not all here will share my gratitude. His warning proved prophetic. While Quentin's father accepted her presence with gruff courtesy, others in the household viewed her with suspicion and fear. The women servants crossed themselves when she passed. The priest attached to the household watched her with narrowed eyes, particularly when he noticed the pagan symbol she wore. Quentin did his best to shield her, assigning her chambers near his own and a Saxon maidservant named Edith who spoke a little Norse. But the isolation weighed heavily on Jorunn's spirit. In her homeland she had been respected, valued for her knowledge of healing and herbs. Here, she was an oddity at best, a heathen witch at worst. Weeks passed, and summer ripened toward harvest. Jorunn learned more of the Saxon tongue, enough to make herself understood, though she still struggled with their strange, soft consonants. She began to assist the estate's healer, an old woman named Winfred who initially resented her presence but gradually came to appreciate Jorunn's knowledge of northern remedies. And always there was Quentin. He sought her company whenever his duties permitted, showing her the lands his family protected, teaching her their customs, listening to her stories of Norse gods and heroes with genuine interest. Sometimes, riding beside him across the green hills of Wessex, Jorunn almost forgot she was an exile in a foreign land. Until the night of the harvest feast, when everything changed. The great hall was filled with noise and warmth, trestle tables groaning under the weight of roasted meats and autumn fruits. Thane Wulfric had invited neighboring lords to celebrate, and Jorunn found herself seated near Quentin at the high table, uncomfortably aware of the curious stares directed her way. The pagan woman, she heard whispered. Lord Quentin's foreign pet. She kept her head high, her face impassive, though her cheeks burned with humiliation. Quentin, engaged in conversation with a nobleman to his right, seemed unaware of her discomfort until a servant refilled his cup and whispered something in his ear. His expression darkened as he glanced toward the hall entrance. A party of newcomers had arrived, led by a man of middle years with a haughty bearing and a young woman at his side. The girl was fair-haired and delicately beautiful, her gown rich with embroidery and her fingers heavy with rings. Who is that? Jorunn asked Edith, who hovered nearby. Lord Ethelward and his daughter, Lady Elspeth, the maid replied. They say she has set her cap for Lord Quentin since they were children. Something cold and unpleasant settled in Jorunn's stomach as she watched Quentin rise to greet the newcomers. He embraced Lord Ethelward like an old friend before turning to the daughter, taking her hand with courtly grace. The young woman smiled up at him with unmistakable affection. "They would make a fine match," a voice said beside her. Thane Wulfric had moved to occupy his son's empty seat. "Lord Ethelward's lands border ours. A union would strengthen both our houses." Jorunn met the older man's knowing gaze. "You speak as though it is already decided." "Nothing is decided," Wulfric replied, sipping his mead. "But it would be a wise alliance. Quentin will inherit my lands one day. He will need a Saxon wife, Saxon sons." "Of course," Jorunn said stiffly. "That is only natural." The Thane studied her face. "You care for my son." It wasn't a question, and Jorunn saw no point in denying what must be obvious to the observant older man. "Your son saved me from exile and shame. I owe him my loyalty." "Loyalty," Wulfric repeated with a small smile. "Is that what you Norse call it?" He leaned closer, his voice lowering. "I see how he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. And I see the same look mirrored in your eyes." Jorunn's heart quickened. "Thane Wulfric, I am not a cruel man, Jorunn Dagsdottir," he interrupted. "You saved my son's life, and for that, I will be eternally grateful. But gratitude does not change the realities of our world. Quentin has responsibilities to his bloodline, to our people. He cannot follow his heart if it leads him to you." The truth of his words struck her like a physical blow. What future could she and Quentin possibly have? She, a pagan exile with nothing to her name; he, a Saxon lord with duties to his family and his king. Whatever grew between them was doomed before it could flower. "I understand," she said quietly. "And I would never ask him to choose between his duty and whatever he might feel for me." Wulfric nodded, seeming satisfied. "You are a woman of honor, as my son said. Perhaps, in another life, things might have been different." He rose, returning to his place at the center of the table just as Quentin approached with the newcomers. "Jorunn," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes, "may I present Lord Ethelward and his daughter, Lady Elspeth. My friends, this is Jorunn Dagsdottir, who saved my life when our ship foundered off the Norse coast." Lord Ethelward inclined his head with cool politeness. "We have heard the tale. Quite remarkable." Lady Elspeth's assessment was less charitable, her gaze sliding over Jorunn's simple gown and the Thor's hammer at her throat. "How unusual to welcome a heathen to a Christian table," she remarked in Saxon, clearly not expecting Jorunn to understand. "Christ himself welcomed those of different faiths to his table." Jorunn replied in the same tongue, her accent thick but her meaning clear. "Or so I have been taught by your priests." Elspeth's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, while Quentin failed to hide a smile. "Jorunn has been learning our language," he explained. "She is a quick study." "Evidently," Elspeth replied coldly. "How fortunate for us all." The rest of the evening passed in strained politeness, with Elspeth monopolizing Quentin's attention, while Jorunn picked at her food, keenly aware of Thane Wulfric's earlier words. When the tables were cleared for dancing, she slipped away from the hall, needing air and solitude to clear her troubled thoughts. The night was cool, stars scattered across the sky like silver runes on black velvet. Jorunn found a stone bench in the garden and sat, lifting her face to the familiar constellations. The same stars shone over Vestfold, over her father's hall and the fjords of her childhood. Did Eirik look up at them now, thinking of his exiled sister? "You left without saying goodbye." She didn't need to turn to know Quentin had followed her. His voice had become as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. "The feast was not to my taste," she replied. "Too many curious eyes." He settled beside her on the bench, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Elspeth was unkind. I apologize for her behavior. She sees me as a threat," Jorunn said, still gazing at the stars. "She's not wrong." A long silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words. Finally, Quentin reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "My father expects me to marry her," he said quietly. "Our families have been allies for generations. It would be an advantageous match." "Do you love her?" Jorunn asked, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I've known her since childhood. She is familiar. Safe." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "But no, Jorunn. I do not love her." The confession hung in the air between them, dangerous and intoxicating. "Quentin," she began, but he silenced her with a gentle finger against her lips. "Let me speak," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Since the moment you pulled me from the sea, something has grown between us. Something I never expected to find with a woman of the North, with someone so different from myself. At first I thought it was merely gratitude, then admiration for your courage, your strength. But it's more than that, Jorunn. So much more." Her heart thundered in her chest as he cupped her face with his hand. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I love you," he whispered. "Against all reason, against the wishes of my people and yours, against everything I was raised to believe. I love you, Jorunn Dagsdottir, and I can no longer pretend otherwise." Before she could respond, his lips found hers in a kiss that started gentle but quickly blazed into something fierce and hungry. She wound her arms around his neck, surrendering to the feelings she had denied for too long. When they finally broke apart, breathless and trembling, Jorunn pressed her forehead against his. "This cannot be, Quentin. You know it as well as I. Your father, your people, they would never accept me as your wife. Then we will make them accept you," he said with quiet determination. "Or we will go where we can be together without their judgment. You would abandon your birthright? Your duty?" She shook her head. "I cannot let you do that. Not for me. It would be my choice," he insisted. "And what is duty compared to a lifetime without the one you love?" A rustling in the nearby shrubbery interrupted their conversation. Quentin rose quickly, placing himself between Jorunn and the potential threat. "Who's there?" Father Aldred, the household priest, emerged from the shadows, his expression cold with disapproval. "I thought it wise to see where the heathen woman had disappeared to," he said. "Now I understand why you have resisted baptism, despite the Thane's urging. She has bewitched you, Lord Quentin." "You overstep, priest," Quentin warned. "What passes between Lady Jorunn and myself is not your concern. Everything that threatens the souls under my care is my concern," Aldred replied. "This liaison cannot continue. I will speak to your father immediately." As the priest turned to leave, Jorunn stepped forward. "Wait," she called. "I will consent to hear your Christian teachings. To learn of your God." Both men stared at her in surprise. "Jorunn," Quentin began, but she silenced him with a look. "I do not promise conversion," she clarified to the priest. "But I will listen with an open heart. Is that not what your Christ would want?" Father Aldred studied her suspiciously. "And why this sudden interest in salvation?" "Because I love Quentin Wulfricsson," she said simply. "And I would understand the faith that shaped him." Her honesty seemed to catch the priest off guard. After a moment's consideration, he nodded stiffly. "Very well. We will begin tomorrow after morning prayers. But know this, true love seeks the beloved's highest good. If you truly care for Lord Quentin, you will want his soul unburdened by sin." After the priest departed, Quentin turned to her with confusion. "You need not do this for me, Jorunn. I would never ask you to abandon your gods." "I am not abandoning anything," she replied. "But I have lived among your people for months now. It is time I learned more of what they believe." She touched his cheek gently. "And perhaps, if I show willingness to understand your ways, they might begin to accept me as more than just the foreign woman you rescued." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "You think to win them over. I think to try," she corrected. "For us. If there is to be an us. There already is," he assured her, pulling her close once more. "There has been since you dragged me from the sea." The following weeks brought changes that rippled through the Thane's household. True to her word, Jorunn attended Father Aldred's religious instruction each morning, listening attentively to his explanations of Christian doctrine. Though she asked questions that sometimes flustered the priest with their directness, she never mocked or dismissed his teachings. In return, she spoke to him of Norse beliefs, not to convert, but to help him understand the traditions that had shaped her world. To her surprise, the priest began to show genuine interest in her accounts of Yggdrasil and the Nine Realms, even as he maintained they were misguided myths. "Your Thor and our god both demand justice," he admitted one day after a particularly spirited discussion. "Perhaps there is some echo of divine truth even in pagan stories." It was a small concession, but significant coming from a man who had initially viewed her as little more than a demonic influence. Meanwhile, Thane Wulfric watched the growing attachment between his son and the Norse woman with a mixture of resignation and concern. After observing Jorunn's efforts to understand their ways, he summoned her to his private chambers. "My son is determined to marry you," he said without preamble when she appeared before him. "He has made this clear to me, despite my objections." Jorunn met his gaze steadily. "I have not encouraged him to defy you, Thane Wulfric." "No," he agreed. "You have instead set about winning over my household. Even Father Aldred speaks well of you now, though he still prays for your conversion." A reluctant smile tugged at the older man's lips. "It is a clever strategy." "Not a strategy," she corrected. "I simply wish to understand the world Quentin comes from, as he has sought to understand mine." The Thane rose from his chair, moving to the window that overlooked his lands. "Lord Ethelward is pressuring me for a betrothal agreement. He believes Quentin's interest in you is merely an infatuation that will pass." "And what do you believe?" Jorunn asked quietly. Wulfric turned to face her, his expression softening. "I believe my son has found in you a spirit that matches his own. I see how he looks at you, the same way I once looked at his mother." He sighed heavily. "But I also see the challenges you would face. A Norse wife, even one who tolerates Christian ways, will not be easily accepted by the other noble families. There will be whispers, hostility, perhaps even danger." "I am no stranger to hostility," she replied. "And Quentin is worth whatever challenges may come." The Thane studied her for a long moment. "Would you take baptism? Not just attend the priest's teachings, but fully embrace our faith?" Jorunn hesitated. This was the question she had been wrestling with since beginning her instruction with Father Aldred. "I find beauty in your Christ teachings," she said carefully. "His compassion, his sacrifice, these things speak to me. But the gods of my ancestors have shaped who I am. I cannot simply cast them aside as if they meant nothing." To her surprise, Wulfric nodded with something like respect. "An honest answer, at least. Better than a false conversion." He seemed to come to a decision. "If you will not take baptism, then there is only one path forward if you and my son are determined to be together." "What path is that?" "You must prove your worth to our people in a way they cannot ignore. Something beyond your rescue of my son." The Thane's eyes gleamed with sudden inspiration. "The autumn council approaches. King Athelred himself will attend, along with all the major Thanes and their families. If you were to perform some service for our kingdom, something that demonstrated your loyalty to Wessex despite your Norse blood." Hope flickered in Jorunn's heart. "What service could I provide?" "That," said Wulfric, "remains to be seen. But opportunities have a way of presenting themselves to those who watch for them." The king's arrival transformed the quiet estate into a hive of activity. Servants scrubbed and polished, huntsmen brought in fresh game, and the mead hall was decorated with autumn flowers and greenery. Nobles from across Wessex gathered, their retinues swelling the population of the estate to bursting. Jorunn observed the preparations with growing anxiety. Quentin had been occupied with his duties as the Thane's son, leaving her largely to her own devices. She had continued her work with Winfried, gathering late summer herbs and preparing remedies for the coming winter, all while pondering Thane Wulfric's cryptic advice. What service could she possibly render that would convince these Saxon nobles to accept her relationship with Quentin? The answer came 3 days before the council, in the form of a breathless messenger who arrived at the estate's gates shortly after dawn. Quentin himself sought Jorunn out in the herb garden where she worked alongside Winfried. "Raiders have been sighted," he said without preamble, his expression grave. "Norse longships, moving up the coast toward the river mouth." Jorunn felt the blood drain from her face. "How many?" "5 ships. Perhaps 100 warriors." His eyes held hers. "They fly the raven banner of Jarl Gunnar." The name struck her like a physical blow. Jarl Gunnar, her father's overlord, the man whose feasting table Dag had sat at. "This is no mere raid," she whispered. "Not with 5 ships." "No," Quentin agreed grimly. "The king believes they mean to establish a winter camp, to use as a base for raids throughout the season. They must be stopped before they can secure a foothold." Winfried gathered her herbs with trembling hands. "They'll butcher us all in our beds," the old woman muttered. "Heathen savages." Jorunn flinched at the familiar slur, but said nothing. Instead, she rose to her feet, brushing soil from her skirts. "What will you do?" "The king has called his warriors to assemble. We ride within the hour." Quentin's face was set with determination. "The council is postponed until the threat is dealt with." "Let me come with you," Jorunn said suddenly. Quentin stared at her in disbelief. "To battle? Against your own people?" "Not to fight," she clarified. "But I know Jarl Gunnar, his tactics, his weaknesses. I might be able to help." Hope and doubt warred on Quentin's face. "My father would never allow it. Nor would the king." "Then don't ask their permission," she urged. "I can ride, Quentin. I can keep up. And I may be the only one who can prevent a slaughter, on both sides." After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "Prepare yourself. Bring only what you can carry on horseback. And Jorunn." He glanced at Winfried, then switched to Norse. "If we encounter your kinsmen, I cannot guarantee your safety from either side. You will be viewed as a traitor by the Norse, and still mistrusted by many Saxons." "I understand the risk," she replied in the same tongue. "But I cannot stand by while the people I care for kill each other. There must be another way." Within the hour, Jorunn had changed into riding clothes borrowed from one of the servant boys and packed a small satchel with healing supplies. She met Quentin at the stables, where he had already saddled a sturdy mare for her. "Stay close to me," he instructed as they rode to join the assembling warriors. "And keep your hood up. The fewer who recognize you, the better." The Saxon force was impressive, nearly 200 mounted warriors in mail and helmets, carrying spears, swords, and round shields emblazoned with crosses. At their head rode King Athelred himself, a stern-faced man in his 5th decade, and beside him, Thane Wulfric and other noble lords. Jorunn kept to the rear of the column as they set out, her heart pounding with fear and determination. She had no illusions about what she was doing, positioning herself between two forces that would gladly kill her for different reasons. Yet she could not turn back. Not when there was a chance, however slim, that she might prevent bloodshed. They rode hard through the day, following the coastline north toward the reported Norse landing site. As dusk approached, scouts returned with news that sent a ripple of tension through the Saxon ranks. "The Vikings have established a camp at the river bend," Quentin translated for Jorunn as they made their own camp for the night. "They'd begun constructing defensive works, a ditch and palisade. By tomorrow, they'll be well entrenched. They mean to stay." Jorunn murmured. "This is no raid. This is the beginning of a settlement." "The king won't allow it," Quentin said. "He means to attack at dawn, before their defenses are complete." Jorunn's mind raced. A direct assault against Norse warriors, even with superior numbers, would result in heavy casualties on both sides. There had to be another solution. "Take me to your father," she said suddenly. "And the king? I have an idea, but they must hear it from me." Quentin hesitated. "Jorunn, the king doesn't even know you're here. When he discovers I brought a Norse woman." "Then let him discover it now, when I might be of use, rather than in the middle of battle," she interrupted. "Please, Quentin. Trust me." After a moment's consideration, he nodded. Stay here. I'll speak to my father first. He returned a quarter hour later with Thane Wulfric, whose expression darkened when he saw Jorunn. You should have left her at home. He growled at his son. This is no place for women, especially one of Norse blood. Hear her out, father, Quentin urged. She knows Jarl Gunnar. Wulfric turned his scowl on Jorunn. Speak quickly, girl. What do you know that might help us? I know that Jarl Gunnar is not a man to throw away his warriors' lives needlessly, she replied. He is proud but pragmatic. If he sees that he is outnumbered and his position untenable, he might be persuaded to withdraw without bloodshed. Persuaded how? Wulfric demanded. Vikings understand only the language of steel. Not true, Jorunn countered. They understand honor, and they understand advantage. Offer Jarl Gunnar something that allows him to retreat with his pride intact, and he may take it rather than risk his men in a battle he cannot win. Wulfric considered her words. And what would you suggest we offer? Safe passage back to the sea. Perhaps trading rights at a designated port, under strict conditions. She met the Thane's skeptical gaze. It is better than a field of dead men, is it not? And why would he trust our offer? Wulfric asked. Or we his acceptance? Jorunn took a deep breath. Because I will deliver the message myself. Quentin stepped forward in alarm. No! It's too dangerous. They won't harm me, she insisted. I am Dag Thorvaldson's daughter. Jarl Gunnar has known me since childhood. And if your father is among them? Quentin demanded. The man who exiled you? The possibility sent a chill through her, but Jorunn forced herself to appear confident. Then he will be all the more reason for the Jarl to listen. Either way, I am your best hope for resolving this without bloodshed. Thane Wulfric studied her with new respect. You would risk yourself for Saxon lives? The very people you once considered enemies? I would risk myself to prevent needless death on both sides, she corrected. Norse and Saxon alike. After a long moment, Wulfric nodded. I will take you to the king. But I warn you, Athelred is not known for his trust of foreigners, particularly those of Viking blood. King Ethelred's tent was the largest in the camp, guarded by grim-faced warriors who eyed Jorunn with open suspicion as she entered behind Thane Wulfric and Quentin. Inside, the king sat at a rough wooden table with maps spread before him, surrounded by his closest advisors. He looked up with irritation at the interruption. Wulfric? What is the meaning of this? Who is this boy? Jorunn pushed back her hood, revealing her face and long golden hair. A murmur ran through the gathered nobles. This is Jorunn Dagsdottir, Wulfric explained. The Norse woman who saved my son's life. She has knowledge of Jarl Gunnar that may prove useful. The king's eyes narrowed. A spy in our midst? No, my lord, Jorunn said, dropping to one knee in the Saxon manner Quentin had taught her. I have lived among your people for months now. I seek only to prevent unnecessary bloodshed. Stand up, girl, Athelred commanded. And speak plainly. What do you know of this Jarl? Rising to her feet, Jorunn explained her plan with as much clarity and conviction as she could muster. The king listened in silence, his expression giving nothing away, while his advisors exchanged skeptical glances. When she finished, one of the older lords scoffed. You expect us to believe a Viking Jarl will simply pack up and leave because a woman asks him to? Preposterous. Not because a woman asks, Jorunn replied calmly, but because he will recognize that his position is untenable. 5 ships of warriors cannot stand against your army, my lord king, and Jarl Gunnar is no fool. He will see the wisdom in withdrawal, if offered honorable terms. And if he refuses? The king asked. If he takes you hostage, or worse? Then you have lost nothing but a single Norse woman, she said. And you may proceed with your attack as planned. Athelred studied her with shrewd eyes. You would risk your life for this? Why? Jorunn glanced at Quentin before answering. Because I have come to care for your people, my lord. Not all of them, perhaps, but enough to wish them no harm. And because I still care for my own people as well. I would spare both sides if I can. The king exchanged a long look with Thane Wulfric, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally he nodded. Very well. You may attempt this parley at first light. But know this, if there is any sign of treachery, we will attack without hesitation, and your countrymen will be shown no mercy. I understand, my lord, Jorunn replied, bowing her head. Thank you for this chance. As they left the king's tent, Quentin pulled her aside, his face tight with worry. This is madness, Jorunn. If your father is there, then I will face him, she said simply. It is time. At least let me accompany you, he pleaded. She shook her head. They will be more likely to trust me if I come alone. She reached up to touch his face. Have faith in me, Quentin, as I have faith in you. I do, he whispered, catching her hand and pressing it to his lips. But I fear for you. If anything happened. Nothing will happen, she assured him, though they both knew it was a promise she might not be able to keep. Tomorrow night we will sit together by the fire and laugh about how worried you were. But as she lay awake that night, staring up at the stars through the gaps in the tent's canopy, Jorunn was not so certain. She fingered the Thor's hammer at her throat, sending a silent prayer to the gods of her childhood and the Christian God she had come to know through Father Aldred's teachings. If ever she needed divine protection, it would be in the morning. Dawn broke with mists rising from the river, shrouding the landscape in ghostly white. Jorunn dressed carefully in a simple blue gown Quentin had procured for her, Norse in style but without ornament, her only jewelry the hammer pendant. She braided her hair in the traditional manner of her people, chin held high as she mounted her horse. The Saxon forces had positioned themselves just beyond sight of the Norse encampment, hidden by a ridge of low hills. From here, Jorunn would ride alone, carrying a branch of oak leaves as a symbol of parley. Thane Wulfric approached as she prepared to depart. Remember, he said gruffly, you represent Wessex now, whatever your blood. Make sure this Jarl understands the consequences of refusal. I will, my lord, she promised. Quentin was the last to bid her farewell, his face pale with worry. Return to me, he said simply, the words carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken emotions. Always, she replied, touching his cheek once before turning her horse toward the Norse camp. The ride seemed both endless and too brief. As she crested the final hill, Jorunn saw the Norse encampment spread before her, 5 longships pulled up on the riverbank, a half-completed palisade surrounding a collection of tents and cook fires. Men moved about with purpose, some digging the defensive ditch, others sharpening weapons. Her people. Yet no longer hers. A horn sounded as she was spotted, and warriors rushed to the perimeter, spears and shields at the ready. Jorunn continued forward at a steady pace, the oak branch held high. I come under truce, she called in Norse as she drew near. I seek audience with Jarl Gunnar Haraldsson. The warriors exchanged confused glances at the sound of their own language from a woman approaching alone. One stepped forward, a grizzled veteran with a scar bisecting his face. Who asks for the Jarl? He demanded. Jorunn straightened in her saddle. I am Jorunn Dagsdottir, daughter of Dag Thorvaldsson of Vestfold. I come as emissary from King Athelred of Wessex. A murmur ran through the assembled warriors. The scarred man's eyes widened in recognition. Dagsdottir? The healer? He turned to a younger warrior. Fetch the Jarl. And Dag if he's awake. Jorunn's heart stuttered at the confirmation that her father was indeed among the raiders. She dismounted, keeping her movements slow and deliberate as the Norse warriors gathered around her, curiosity and suspicion mingling in their expressions. Minutes later, the crowd parted to admit a tall, broad-shouldered man with iron-gray hair and a beard adorned with gold beads. Jarl Gunnar had aged since Jorunn had last seen him, but his bearing was still that of a man accustomed to absolute authority. And behind him, his face a mask of shock and disbelief, came her father. Jorunn? Dag Thorvaldsson stared as if seeing a ghost. By the gods, is it truly you? She inclined her head, fighting to keep her voice steady. Father! Jarl Gunnar looked between them with shrewd eyes. So the rumors were true. Dagsdottir, taken by Saxons. He gestured toward the oak branch she still held. Yet you come to us as their messenger. Explain this strange sight, Jorunn Dagsdottir. I was not taken, Jarl Gunnar, she replied. I chose exile among the Saxons rather than face shame among our people. Her father's expression darkened. Shame you earned by harboring our enemy. An enemy whose life I saved, she countered. As I now hope to save many lives, both Saxon and Norse, if you will hear my message. The Jarl considered her for a moment, then nodded. Speak then. What does the Saxon king wish to say that he sends a Norse woman to deliver his words? Jorunn drew herself up to her full height. King Athelred offers you safe passage back to the sea, without bloodshed, if you abandon this attempt at settlement. In exchange, he will grant limited trading rights at the port of Hamwick, under terms to be negotiated. Murmurs rippled through the gathered warriors. Jarl Gunnar's eyebrows rose in surprise. The Saxon king offers terms rather than battle? That is unexpected. He offers terms because I convinced him it was preferable to the slaughter that would otherwise ensue, Jorunn explained. But make no mistake, Jarl, if you refuse, 200 Saxon warriors await beyond those hills, and they will attack without mercy. 200? The Jarl exchanged glances with her father. You're certain of this number? I counted them myself, she confirmed. Including the king's personal guard and the Thane's household warriors. All heavily armed, all mounted. Dag stepped forward, his eyes never leaving his daughter's face. And why would you betray your own people this way? Have you forgotten who you are, Jorunn? The question struck her like a blow, but she held her ground. I have forgotten nothing, father. Nor have I betrayed anyone. I seek only to prevent needless death. She has been bewitched by the Christians, one of the warriors muttered, making a sign against evil. No, Jorunn said firmly. I have learned their ways, as they have learned some of ours. And I have discovered that beneath our differences, Saxons and Norse are not so unlike. She turned back to the Jarl. You came seeking land, wealth, glory. But this venture will bring you only death. The Saxon forces are too great, their defenses too strong in this region. There will be other opportunities, other targets less well protected. Jarl Gunnar stroked his beard thoughtfully. And these trading rights? What guarantee do we have that the Saxons will honor such an agreement? The king's word given before his thanes, she replied. And my own pledge to ensure the terms are kept. Your pledge? Her father's laugh was bitter. What power does an exiled woman hold in the Saxon court? Jorunn met his gaze steadily. More than you might think, father. I have earned the respect of Thane Wulfric and his son. Even the king listens to my counsel in matters concerning our people. His son, Dag repeated, his eyes narrowing. So that's how it is. You've taken a Saxon lover. The accusation hung in the air, sharp as a blade. Jorunn lifted her chin defiantly. I have found love where I least expected it. As have many before me, on both sides of this conflict. To her surprise, Jarl Gunnar chuckled. The heart follows its own course, Dag. You of all men should remember that. Didn't you once take a Celtic woman to wife, against your father's wishes? Her father's face flushed, but he made no reply. The Jarl turned back to Jorunn. I must discuss these terms with my captains. Wait here. He withdrew to a nearby tent with several of the senior warriors, including her father. Jorunn remained where she was, conscious of the stares from the Norse fighters who had once been her people. Some gazed at her with curiosity, others with undisguised hostility. A young warrior approached, offering her a horn of mead. You were kind to my sister once, he explained when she looked surprised. You healed her fever when others had given up hope. Jorunn accepted the drink with a grateful nod, recognizing him now as Leif, brother to a girl she had treated 2 winters past. How does Sigrid fare? Well, he replied. She has a husband now, and a child on the way. He glanced over his shoulder at the tent where the leaders conferred. Not all have forgotten your kindness, Jorunn Dagsdottir, whatever path you now walk." His words warmed her more than the need. Perhaps there was hope after all, not just for this day's negotiation, but for a future where Norse and Saxon might find common ground. When Jarl Gunnar emerged from the tent, his face was unreadable. Dag followed, his expression stormy but resigned. "We have considered your offer," Jarl announced. "And while it pains me to abandon a promising site, I am not one to waste good warriors in a futile battle." He fixed Jorunn with a penetrating stare. "We will accept the king's terms, with one condition." "What condition?" she asked warily. "That you, Jorunn Dagsdottir, personally oversee the trading agreements at Hamwick. We will deal with no other representative of the Saxon king." The request surprised her, but she quickly grasped its wisdom. The Jarl wanted someone who understood both cultures, someone who could translate not just words but intentions. "I will need the king's approval," she said. "But I believe he will agree." Jarl Gunnar nodded, satisfied. "Then we have an accord. We will break camp at once and return to our ships. By nightfall, we will be gone from this place." Relief flooded through her. She had done it, prevented a battle that would have cost dozens, perhaps hundreds of lives on both sides. As the Norse warriors began dismantling their camp, her father approached. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, years of separation and hurt stretching between them. "You look well," he said finally. "The Saxon life agrees with you." "I have found my place there," she replied. "Though I still carry the teachings of my mother, and the stories of our people." Dag's weathered face softened slightly. "Your mother would be proud of your courage, if not your choice of allies." He hesitated, then added gruffly, "Eirik asks about you. Often." Tears pricked at her eyes. "Tell him I think of him every day. That I see the same stars he does." "He gave you Astrid's comb," her father observed, noticing the carved bone ornament in her hair. "My most treasured possession," she confirmed. "It reminds me of home." Dag studied her face for a long moment. "This Saxon lord's son, he treats you well?" "With honor and love," she answered simply. Her father nodded, something like acceptance flickering in his eyes. "Then perhaps the Norns knew what they were about when they cast you on this strange shore." He reached into his belt pouch and withdrew a small object, a carved wooden figure of Frigg, goddess of marriage and motherhood. "Your mother made this as a wedding gift for you. Take it. Whatever gods you now follow, remember those who watched over your ancestors." Jorunn accepted the figure with trembling hands. "Thank you, father." It wasn't forgiveness, not completely. But it was acknowledgement, and perhaps the beginning of understanding. As she mounted her horse to return to the Saxon lines, Jorunn felt lighter than she had in months, as if some invisible burden had been lifted from her shoulders. The news of her successful negotiation was met with stunned disbelief, then growing acclaim as the Saxon forces watched the Norse break camp and return to their ships. By sunset, the longships had disappeared downriver toward the open sea, and King Athelred himself approached Jorunn as she stood with Quentin on the riverbank. "It seems we owe you a debt, Jorunn Dagsdottir," the king said, his earlier suspicion replaced with reluctant respect. "Few of my advisers believed your plan would succeed." "The Jarl is a practical man, my lord," she replied. "And he has agreed to the trading terms, with one stipulation, that I serve as intermediary at Hamwick." The king's eyebrows rose. Bold of him to make demands, yet not unreasonable. He glanced at Quentin, whose proud gaze had not left Jorunn since her return. "I suspect you would not object to such an arrangement, Lord Quentin?" "I would support it wholeheartedly, my lord," Quentin replied. "Jorunn has proven her loyalty to Wessex beyond any doubt today." "Indeed she has." The king turned to Thane Wulfric, who had joined them. "Your son seems quite attached to this Norse woman, Wulfric. I trust you have no objections to formalizing their relationship?" The Thane bowed his head. "None, my lord. She has earned her place among us." Jorunn's heart soared at these words. After months of uncertainty and alienation, she had finally been accepted, not just by Quentin and his father, but by the king himself. As the Saxon forces made camp for the night, celebrating their bloodless victory with mead and song, Quentin led Jorunn to a quiet spot overlooking the river. "You were magnificent today," he said, drawing her into his arms. "I've never been more proud, or more terrified." She laughed softly. "I was frightened too. But I knew what had to be done. And you've accomplished the impossible," he marveled. "Peace between Norse and Saxon, at least for now. Trading instead of raiding." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "And you spoke with your father?" "Yes." She touched the wooden Frigg figure, now hanging beside her Thor's hammer. "He may never fully forgive me, but he understands, I think. Or is beginning to." Quentin took her hands in his. "Jorunn Dagsdottir, from the moment you pulled me from the sea, my life has been transformed. You have shown me a world beyond the narrow confines of what I was taught to believe. You have challenged me, inspired me, and yes, loved me despite all the reasons you should not." He dropped to one knee before her, in the Saxon manner. "Will you be my wife? Not as a Norse woman adopting Saxon ways, nor as a convert abandoning her beliefs, but as yourself, the brave, brilliant woman who straddles two worlds and makes them both richer for it." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she pulled him to his feet. "Yes," she whispered. "1,000 times yes." Their kiss was witnessed only by the rising moon and the flowing river, elements that belonged to no single people but to all who lived beneath the same sky. In the spring, they were married twice, once in the Christian manner, with Father Aldred officiating in Thane Wulfric's chapel, and once in the Norse tradition, with vows spoken beneath an oak tree and rings exchanged over a sword. Jorunn wore her mother's comb in her hair and carried wildflowers gathered from both English meadows and seeds brought from her homeland. The trading post at Hamwick flourished under her guidance, becoming a place where Norse and Saxon met in peace rather than war. Stories spread of the Norse woman who had prevented a battle through words alone, and of the Saxon lord who had crossed cultural boundaries for love. And when their first child was born, a daughter with Quentin's blue eyes and Jorunn's golden hair, they named her Astrid Ethelflaed, honoring both lineages that flowed in her veins. She would grow up knowing the tales of Odin and Christ, of Norse heroes and Saxon kings, a living bridge between two peoples who had been enemies for generations. Sometimes, on clear nights, Jorunn would take her daughter to the highest hill on Thane Wulfric's lands and point to the stars. "Those same stars shine over the fjords where I was born," she would explain. "And over the lands where your father's ancestors lived. The sky connects us all, little one. Remember that, always." And in the distance, if she listened closely, she could almost hear the roar of the North Sea, the waters that had once nearly claimed Quentin's life, but had instead given them both a new beginning.